The focus of this section of the unit is on how well Canada's immigration laws meet the needs of immigrants as well as Canadians. So we need to look at what those immigrant issues are and the laws that control our immigration policies. Most Canadians have an immigrant history. It might be a century ago or it might have been last year. But what does it take to move to Canada? What are the legal expectations and what are the social and economic pressures? When we talk about immigration, we often think about the push and pull factors. What are those? Well, it's really simple. What is pushing someone to move away from their country and what is pulling them to want to move to Canada? For many immigrants, the push is that there may not be very many job opportunities, and the pull is that Canada's economy is strong and we often seek out those skilled workers to move here to Canada. Early in Canada's history, we wanted to attract immigrants from preferred countries, Britain and France. Those were the two mother countries that had brought most of the settlers to Canada. As time passed, we expanded east, first to Germany and then to the rest of Eastern Europe. While Eastern Europeans were looked down upon by the British and French settlers, the Canadian government realized that this group of people could handle the weather and best take advantage of the farming conditions that were similar to their homeland. It wasn't until much later that Canada started openly attracting immigrants from Asia and Africa. With the exception of events like the acceptance of Chinese laborers to help build the railway, Canada passed laws that openly discriminated against these ethnic groups. They argued that Asian and African peoples just weren't suited for Canada's climate and culture. Some of examples of this include the Chinese head tax. When Canada was finished building the railway, many Canadians wanted the Chinese workers to go home, while the Chinese workers wanted to bring their families here. So in order to reduce the number of Chinese immigrants, the government put a special tax just on this group, and it could be the equivalent of a full year's salary. This meant that families couldn't afford to bring everyone to Canada, and often families lived apart for the rest of their lives. In 2006, the Government of Canada officially apologized for this racist policy. Another policy that seemed logical but in fact was racist was the rule that when immigrating to Canada, your boat couldn't stop at a port to refuel. It had to be a non-stop trip. The argument was that this would prevent the spread of disease, which makes sense, but in reality what it did is it made sure that most immigrants came from Europe, because at that time, boats from Asia or Africa couldn't make a non-stop trip. Today, the majority of immigrants to Canada actually come from Asia. So why does Canada actively encourage people to immigrate here? The biggest reason is economic. While we are a very large country physically, we're really quite small in population. Canada has the goal of increasing our population by 1% every year through immigration. The more people we can bring to Canada, the more those people will consume, which means the economy will grow. Many Canadians have the misconception that immigrants take our jobs, when in fact, the opposite is true. The more people that move into a community means that you'll have to build more houses, staff more stores, send their kids to more schools, sell more groceries, and on and on. Canada seeks to attract skilled workers from around the world. How many of you have a doctor that's from another country? That's because we've invited those skilled workers to leave their home and come here to live. Not that it's easy for them. They may be very skilled in their chosen field, but if Canada doesn't recognize their educational training, they may have to go back to school. For example, my friend Jocelyn recently moved here with her Canadian husband from the Caribbean. She worked as a very skilled nurse in an emergency room back home, but right now she can't even work because she's waiting for a visa from the government to give her permission to go back to school in order to improve her training to Canadian standards. She desperately wants to work, but she can't even go back to school until the government gives her permission to do so. So why does the government do this? Well, because they want to make sure that those skilled professionals are up to our standards and that there's enough room in the schools for Canadian-born citizens. This can be very frustrating for immigrants who have come here wanting to contribute, but have to wait. And then they hear Canadian-born citizens complaining about having to go to school and asking why all those immigrants just come here and do nothing. Another reason we want to attract immigrants from around the world relates to our demographics. Demographics is the study of groups and populations, like the age group called the baby boomers, or the number of people we have from different countries. Canada prides itself on being a multicultural country, so we want to have immigrants from around the world to contribute to our society. Also, many Canadian-born families aren't having as many kids, so we need to get more young workers here who can help replace all those baby boomers that are retiring. Canada is also known for being a very caring country that does a lot to help others around the world. Humanitarianism is another reason why we try to bring people to Canada. We know that there are parts of the world right now that are very dangerous, and when there's a civil war or a severe natural disaster, Canada will often bring refugees into Canada. A refugee is someone who's forced to leave their home. When we have the ability to help these people escape hardship and enjoy the blessings of becoming Canadian, why not do it? Some people are concerned with the cost associated with bringing refugees into Canada, as they often come here with just the clothes on their back. But the cost of providing these people with food and shelter is a minimal cost when we consider that often within 10 years, these refugees are working and contributing to our economy. So what exactly are the immigration laws in Canada? Well, the laws themselves are dynamic, which means they change depending on what the needs of Canada are and what the ideology is of the governing party. But there are some fundamentals that we can discuss here. First of all, there's the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Some of the key aspects of this legislation state that our immigration and refugee policies must provide social and cultural and economic benefits to Canada, support minority official language communities, respect bilingualism and multiculturalism, promote the integration of immigrants into Canadian society, support a prosperous economy across all parts of Canada, and to reunite families. The Protection Act also lists various factors related to immigration. As we already discussed, probably the number one factor would be economics. We want to attract skilled individuals to provide a strong workforce, especially with all those people who are retiring. Much of Canada's economy and infrastructure has been built by immigrants, like the Chinese helping with the Transcontinental Railway. Also, there are some jobs that Canadians just don't want, or we don't have enough skilled people to fill those jobs. Another factor is political. When considering immigration laws, the governing party must look at what the public wants, because if the government goes against public opinion, they might not get reelected. The policies of other countries can also influence our decisions. By taking in refugees or attracting immigrants, we can build relationships with other countries. Or we could be making a statement against a government we disagree with by allowing their citizens to escape to Canada. Our immigration laws also consider health and security. Immigrants must prove that they're in good health. We don't want someone who's ill putting other Canadians at risk or putting excessive demands on our universal healthcare system. And while someone's health can be a security risk, an even more serious risk since 9/11 is the threat of terrorism. Even supporting a group that is somehow linked to terrorism can prevent you from coming into Canada. And if you have a serious criminal record, we really don't want you to come into our country. That makes sense to me. However, some of these conditions don't apply to the family class or refugee status because they're in a different situation. So what are these classes of immigrants I just mentioned? Well, the largest class of immigrants comes under the independent class, sometimes also referred to as the economic class, because this group must prove that they're a skilled worker that can support themselves and contribute to our economy. We have something called the points system that will decide if they're a good match for Canada's economy. Points are awarded based on their skills, their education, and other factors related to successfully integrating into Canadian society. And you have to reach a certain number of points in order to even be considered. And quite frankly, there's enough Canadian-born citizens who would not earn enough points to even be considered for immigration. The family class includes spouses, partners, children, parents, and grandparents of people who are already living here and are citizens. They don't have to go through the point system to prove that they can contribute to the Canadian economy because the person sponsoring their family member must prove that they have the ability to support their family until that immigrant can begin to support themselves. And we've already discussed the refugee class, who are people escaping persecution, torture, wrongful imprisonment, or cruel and unusual punishment in their country. Canada is dedicated to saving lives and offering protection in order to fulfill Canada's commitment to protect refugees. We've signed a UN convention agreeing to help in any way we can. Also, we always want to promote our humanitarian ideals and values. For all of these groups, there are different levels of government support and services. Obviously, the refugee class needs a lot of government funding to get them settled, but often that money is given to them in the form of loans that must be paid back with interest. The independent class immigrant has already had to prove that they can support themselves, and anyone who sponsors a family class immigrant is expected to take care of the person that they sponsored. So when you hear that immigrants are getting all these free handouts, think twice and check your sources. There are a lot of agencies and organizations that the government does pay for to help immigrants settle here in Canada because we want to make the move as smooth as possible. In our next video, we're going to look at some of the other issues relating to immigration.